I'm really glad to introduce David Arthur to you. And the way this took place, I get pulled aside by Roger Weaver, attorney Roger Weaver, who we work with as a church in various times and things. He said, "Hey, I got somebody I'd like you to meet." And he told me a little bit about David. He said, "Are you open to meeting with him?" And I said, "Absolutely." And so we met at the Cracker Barrel. We ordered. Roger paid and then left. And David and I sat there and got acquainted, and just amazing to hear. I'm so excited about David being here with us this morning. Lord bless you, David, as you come.
Thank you, Pastor. Thank you. All right. I just want to make sure that we are working here. All right. So one thing I had to do is apologize about my attire, although I was told I didn't have to apologize. But there's nothing like getting ready to get dressed in a hotel room and then realizing that you forgot your pants. You have all your shirts neatly pressed and hung up in the garment bag, but you don't have any pants. So I want to thank you. You know, that song is very appropriate, Matt. And the Lord is my deliverer. And he delivered me before I even knew what deliverance was. And he delivered me from each and every stronghold and each and every spirit. And it went from homosexuality to just the effeminate spirit, which are two totally different sins. And a lot of people don't realize that. And so while I was working on creating a video for you all, so I didn't have to actually give testimony and then I could just get into the deliverance, it didn't quite work out that way. So what I wanted to do is just go through a short testimony with you, because the details aren't where it's at. It's in the moment of grace and in the deliverance and in what Jesus Christ is doing in me, with me, and through me right here and right now for such a time as this. Because one thing we will be doing Wednesday night with the youth, I know many of you have heard of this thing going all around our nation, Drag Queen Story Hour, in your public libraries, in your public schools as well. Well, Wednesday night for the youth, we're going to have Drag Queen Story Hour. And I'm going to be reading a short story that a friend of mine, Vicki Joy Anderson, wrote called The Emperor's New Gender. And it's a remake of The Emperor's New Clothes. So that should be exciting. You know, the word tells us that God knows the plans he has for us. I want you to think about it the other way around. Does the enemy know the plans that God has for us? Because I was attacked before I was even born. My mother and my father, one, weren't married. My mother was married to another man at the time. And so there was a lot of strongholds there. When my father decided to take his life just before I was born, I grew up with a natural desire, a natural yearning for male affirmation, for intimacy with a man. That natural yearning was perverted by some men in my life who taught me that intimacy was sexual. And so that's what I grew up thinking, that intimacy was sex. I grew up thinking that if I wanted to have affirmation from a man or a bond with another man, that I had to engage in sexual activity with him. And it got to the point where I realized that the more feminine I acted, the more attention I received. By the age of, this is my kindergarten picture right here, I had already been molested before this picture was taken. So while a lot of people were playing in sandboxes when they were 7, 8, 9 years old and playing on the playground and getting into gymnastics, I was cutting school and hanging out in public bathrooms or at bus stops, waiting for somebody to be intimate with me. And they always came along. As I grew up, I got into drugs and alcohol by 11, 12 years old. By the age of 13, I had overdosed on pills. And by the age of 14, my mother was at her wit's end with me, and so she took me from South Jersey to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which was her only option at the time. And for me, it was out of the frying pan and into the fire. And so I got to Philadelphia, and my mother, who didn't even know Jesus, she didn't know who Jesus even was. She was not a Christian, but she knew from her very nurturing nature as a mother that there was something wrong with what her son was becoming. And so she said to me, I was 14 years old, she said, listen, you won't dress like that, you won't act like that, you won't do that, not under this roof. If you want to do that, there's the door. And at 14 years old, I walked out the door. And I lived on the streets of Philadelphia at 14 years old. And at 14 years old, I started taking female hormones that I would buy on the street or in the nightclub. Just like you buy drugs, I could buy hormones. At 14 years old, I was prostituting my body. And at 14 years old, I was HIV positive. So again, I know many of you at 14 years old were going to your first dance or your first date. My only goal was to be the best prostitute that I could be. And that was my teen years. And it just kind of went on, and it's all the same. And then as I grew, I took hormones and went into my 20s, and it was all the same. There's one of my booking cards from when I was arrested, where even though they put my name, David, on there, they still put female because they didn't know what I was. And so this was all over the country. And this was when I went to prison. And I thank God that I went to prison. I thank God for the man that offended me and hated on me, because that's what I thought he was doing. You know, here I am in a man's prison, and I have breasts, and I look like a woman, and I'm cheerleading on the rec yard. And this officer is looking at me, and he's shaking his head, and he says, come here. And I bounced up to him, and I'm like, what? And he says to me, what's your name? I said, Paige. He said, no, that's a girl's name. What's the name your mama gave you? I said, David. He said, well, David, do you know God didn't create you to be this way? I was offended. I was hurt. I was angry. How dare he hurt my feelings like that? How dare he offend me? How dare he not accept my thoughts and feelings? I said, of course he did. Look at me. I do this well. He said, no. He said, he didn't even intend for you to look like that. And I'm going to tell you this every day. He said, I'm going to do that because I can. And he did, because he could. And he went on, and every day he would tell me, God didn't create you to be that way. And it got to the point where I'd see him, and I'd say, I know God didn't create me to be this way. Then it got to the point where I started looking for him. I wanted to talk to, we called him Bishop. It was a very appropriate nickname for him because he witnessed to everybody, fellow officers and inmates. And he treated everybody the same. He didn't treat anybody any different. He showed no favor. And that was new to me. So I started looking for Bishop on the compound. I'd be sitting in my cell, and people would be in my cell, and they say, oh, here comes Bishop, I'm out of here. And I say, well, y'all go ahead. I want to talk to this man. Because for the first time in my entire life, and I was 30-something years old, I knew that that man that stood before me truly and purely loved me. I had never known what love was. I always thought love was a warm, fuzzy feeling. But then I was starting to see that love was an action. And he was taking action. And it was working. Now, I didn't get out of prison and become this man of God and dive into the scriptures. No, I, like a dog, returned to my vomit. There were some differences, and I even added some new sins and selling drugs and gambling and all kinds of other little things. But I could never get Bishop out of my mind. I could never get those words that he would tell me out of my mind. And in 2008, I started having a lot of bone issues, and I started out needing a cane, and then found out that I had full-fledged osteoporosis, and it eventually led me where I needed a walker, and I was hunched over. I couldn't stand up straight, and I couldn't even move without my walker. And but even this, excruciating pain on all kinds of opioids and pain medicines, even this couldn't stop me from wanting to drag myself to the nightclubs and to the casinos to satisfy the lusts of my flesh. So in 2009, I was stricken down with full-blown AIDS. I had no immune system. My viral load was sky high. And I had infections in my brain. I had infections in my blood. I had boils all over my body from the infections trying to fight their way out. And I don't mean I had a bump here and there. I mean I had like Joe boils. And they put a hospital bed in my bedroom. And they put hospice in place. And they said, David, you don't even have to take the medicine anymore because there's no hope. You won't survive. So here I am laying in a hospital bed in my bedroom, waiting to die with no hope but God. But God had other plans. And I started thinking about Bishop. And I started thinking about my life. And I knew two things. I knew that I was afraid to die. And I knew that I was afraid to die because I didn't want to go to hell, because I knew I was going to hell. I knew that everything I'd done my entire life deserved nothing but hell. I knew that's what I deserved. I also knew that although I would have fought with you tooth and nail, although I had physically hurt people to prove to them how happy I was, that I knew my entire life that the things that I was doing was wrong. Even when I sat on a one-on-one conversation with my closest, nearest relatives and poured my heart out to them that this is how I feel, that this is natural, that there is nothing else. I knew that I was wrong, but my pride wouldn't let me admit it. And that's what I see today when I speak to men and women and youth. I see them not wanting to admit that they're wrong, but they know that they're wrong. So I picked up the Bible, a Bible that sat on my nightstand that I used as a coaster. And I picked it up and I opened up the Bible. And the very first verse I ever read in the New Testament was Romans 1:27. And it told me, men burning in lust for one another, giving up the natural use of the woman. And that one little passage destroyed my whole foundation. It destroyed everything I ever stood on, because it told me that not only was I living sinfully, which I already knew, but that I was living unnaturally, and I was in direct opposition to God's very intent for creating me. I was in direct opposition to my Creator, and I knew it at that moment. So I dove into the word, and I just wanted to absorb all that I could. And as I read more and I prayed and I confessed and I gave it all to him, and I spent weeks and weeks and weeks doing this. I knew that I was confessing to a God that knew everything, but I still knew that his word was so precise to me that I needed to be just as precise and detailed in my confession, and I gave it all back to him. And as people came to visit me, and as people called me, I'd say, you loved me to death, literally. You loved me straight to hell because you didn't tell me that what I was doing was wrong. Of course, they were lost, so they don't know the truth. But there's a message there. Because a lot of us, that's what we do. We just want to love on them. But in turn, what we're really doing is loving them to death, straight to hell. Because we're not offending them. We're not hurting their feelings. We're not revealing the light to them. We're letting them remain in darkness. And we're even condoning it, even if we say we're not. And this is what I see all over. Everywhere I go is parents and grandparents and siblings and friends that just want to love on their loved one. And they don't want to hurt their feelings because they don't want their loved one to walk out of their life, when that's what we're called to do, is to offend them with the truth, because the truth is offensive to those who don't live in the truth and to those who hate the truth. So as I laid in this bed and hospice and people would come out, and my life was just over. And I knew that my life was over. And all these weeks I spent repenting and confessing and praying to God. I never asked him to heal me because I didn't even think that was an option. I never asked him to heal me. I just told him I didn't want to go to hell. I was like, look, because something in me told me that he wasn't sending me to hell, but he sure was going to honor my choice to go there. And he was going to allow me to go to hell, if so I chose. I woke up one morning, and I was kind of confused. I was really confused, because I was in excruciating pain from my bones, from the osteoporosis to the outside of my body with all the boils. And but I had joy in my heart. I had peace. For the first time in my life, I knew what rest meant. And it was real confusing to me. And I said, Lord, I'm ready. I knew at that moment that I was no longer afraid to die, because I knew I wasn't going to hell. And I told him I was ready. I said, Lord, please just take me now. Just take me home. I don't want to be here. I don't want to look like this. I don't want to live like this. I don't want to be like this. I don't want to feel like this. Just take me home. I said, but I have one request. I said that through my death, you be glorified. That through my death, at least one person, and I have to admit I was being selfish because I was thinking of my mother, but I said at least one person come to know you through my death. And from that moment, I believe that he just touched me. Because within the next few days, I was getting up out of bed. I was standing up straight. I hadn't stood up straight for almost 2 years. I was using a cane instead of a walker, and then no cane. Then I'm getting around the house on my own, and I'm going out into the kitchen. I'm making my own food, and I know people are looking at me like, Yeah, this is his last burst of energy. He is going any minute now. But they were wrong. And as I went to the doctors and got more blood work done, and my nurse practitioner says, David, the doctor's not coming in here right now because he can't explain what's going on to you. He doesn't have a scientific explanation for what's happening to you. I said, well, what's happening to me? She says, well, David, we've never seen a viral load as high as yours in this office. And we've never seen one go undetectable. And we've never even heard of somebody going undetectable with a high viral load in such a short period of time. She says, but you're undetectable. I said, well, what's that mean? She says, it means that we can't detect the virus in your system. I said, does that mean I'm negative? And then the scientist in her came out and she said, no. Once positive, always positive. We just can't detect the virus in your system. I said, okay, I'll take that. I'll take full-blown AIDS right now. I'll take anything you have right now because I'm not who I was. Because I know where I'm going. I know who I am. I knew at that moment who I was created to be and who I was created to be like. And so from that moment, and when I went to another doctor who did a bone density test, and she told me that none of the tests in my chart could have possibly been mine. I said, well, why not? She says, because your bone density is better than that of a man your age should be. I said, well, that's God. She said, no, it's just a mistake. I said, no, the mistake was me coming in here to see you when I've already seen the great physician. So I left there and never went back. And the Lord has done nothing with me but lead me, guide me, and bless me along the way. I'm more than grateful. I feel honored to be used in such a way because David died in 2009 and was reborn. And this is him honoring my request to him, that through my death he be glorified, because I know that my life is not my own. Every single breath that I have right here, right now, belongs to him. So I love my life not unto death. You know, we have so much going on in our society right now. We have this LGBT movement that is preying on and devouring your children and your grandchildren. We have this movement that's telling these kids that it's okay, it's natural, they're born that way. I was looking at some of my old videos I was making 5-6 years ago on YouTube, and some of them I've removed in the last couple weeks because in these videos, I'm speaking to people and I'm telling them that those desires they have are unnatural. In the last few months, the Lord has really given me a revelation to see something. That these desires, they're not unnatural. They're having a natural desire for intimacy. It's what they decipher intimacy to be and what they're being taught intimacy is that's unnatural. See, David and Jonathan, they were intimate, but they weren't lovers. There's a Bible called the Queen James Version. In that version of the scriptures, it makes David and Jonathan lovers. It also makes the Last Supper kind of like a homosexual endeavor. So this is what your children and your grandchildren are being faced with. They're being faced with people telling them that and there's two extremes. They're telling them that now the church is saying, well, that's unnatural. The feeling like that is unnatural. And so you're getting a pushback and a fight because they're telling you, I know how I feel. And I know this is not unnatural. And I know how they feel. Because I still have that desire for intimacy with other men. I've just been reprogrammed. And I know that intimacy is natural. It's a bond, exactly. It's a very close friendship, a bond. It's familiarity. And we have to be invested in one another in order to share it. See, in Luke 19, I believe Luke 19, Jesus said, I've come to seek and to save, or to restore that which was lost. Well, what is that? Look at your society today. That is the very image and relationship we were created to bear and to have with our Creator and with one another. I was created to share intimacy with Roger Weaver because we are men. And men must learn how to be intimate with other men. See, that's why intimacy has been so tainted and so twisted and so perverted. Because that is a natural, that's in our nature. And it's so natural and it's so meaningful for each of us to have with one another that the enemy had to chip that away. And he had to get rid of that. Because that is exactly what we were created to have with one another. That's what makes us a body, is being intimate with one another. The kidneys has to be intimate with the rest of the body. The liver has to be intimate with the rest of the body. They can't be doing their own thing and not have any nothing to do with the rest of the body. Then the body don't function properly. See, we all have the same call. That's to make the body glide and run and perform. But we all have different missions. The kidney has a different mission than the liver and so forth. So my mission is to now expose the darkness. And so what I'm going to do this evening is I'm going to reveal what they're teaching kids in school. I actually have a handout that I'm going to pass out that is actual definitions of genders that they're teaching children. And it's an actual handout from the high schools. They're teaching your children that their sex is not, their gender and their sex are two different things. They're teaching your children that their gender is not assigned to them by God Almighty at conception, but the doctor assigns it to them at birth. And they say that that's the medical community's perception. So there's more than just male or female, didn't you know? However, a wise man once told me, he says, if Bruce Jenner died and was dug up in 300 years and they did a DNA test, it would be a man. Doesn't matter what he thinks or feels, he is. He was created to bear the image of God. He was created. See, and even Bruce Jenner has gotten that desire for intimacy misconstrued in his head because of the enemy. So when your child is saying, look, I don't understand these feelings. And when little Joe doesn't understand the feelings he's having for John, we say, well, that's unnatural. Or we say, oh, that's okay. That means you're attracted to him. That means you're homosexual. When that's not the truth. The truth is we need to start teaching them and letting them know. We need to be going down to the I said a couple weeks ago, I said, I'm not going to these school board meetings to talk to the school board. I want to go to the school board meetings to talk to the school, to talk to the kids, to talk to the students. I want to go down to the corner, down to the projects. I want to grab that boy. I want to shake him with his blue hair and his skinny jeans and his earrings and his eyeliner. I want to shake him and let him know that he is fearfully and wonderfully made and that his desires are natural, but that he's been indoctrinated, he's been brainwashed, that he's been told and misled and lied to all of his life. That's what I'm called to do. I believe that's what we're all called to do. We're all called to make sure that we reach the youth, because if we don't, just go to the mall. Go down to Polaris Mall and walk one level and pay close attention to everything you see. Because that's just a preview of what's to come. And it wants to come in here. It wants to come in here and say, well, Pastor, you're not going to stop me from bringing my activist group into your building because I have legal protection. We have to be the ones that stand up and say, I don't care about you. Some things are worth going to jail for. Some things are worth paying a fine for. At least I believe they are. Because he deemed me worthy. When I ran around these streets and I thought there was nothing else but the streets, when I thought there was nothing else but engaging in sexual activity with men and boys and homeless people in alleys, when I thought there was nothing else but then having a drink and passing out or doing drugs and passing out, we have this almighty, all-knowing God, and he's an all-loving God. Yeah, he's judgment and he's wrath, but he's an all-loving God. You know why I know? Because all the time I spent ignoring him and giving him my backside, he allowed me to attain a powerful tool. He loved me enough to let me attain a powerful tool that only I could use. And that's my testimony. And when he placed it in me, he says, now you're going to go out into the darkness, the same darkness that once held you captive. And you're going to shine bright and lead them out of that darkness. You're going to introduce them to Jesus Christ through word, deed, and action. Because, see, Revelation tells us, and forgive me, this one verse always escapes me, I guess because it's so important. But the word tells us exactly how to get them and how to win them over, how they can become overcomers. And it says that they, meaning the world, shall overcome him, meaning the enemy, by the blood of the Lamb and the power of our testimony. Jesus called us to be fishers of men. We catch them, he cleans them. We catch them with our testimony, the power of our word. And he cleans them with his blood, like he cleaned me. Look, I want to thank you, and I want to encourage if any of you come this evening to bring a friend, bring a neighbor, because everybody needs to know. No matter no matter what walk they're on, what journey they're on, they all need to know. Because I'm telling you now, everybody is waking up, whether they're Christian or not. Because when I stood out front of the Supreme Court of the United States back in June, I had atheists come up to me and say, we don't believe in your God. I said, okay. And he says, but we know that killing unborn babies is wrong, and we know that homosexuality is unnatural, so we stand with you. That told me that they believe in something, one. And two, everybody's waking up. Even people that are in that movement think that that movement is out of control. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, David. That was awesome. Thank you for your testimony. David's got a table there in the lobby, and he'll probably be out there between services. But again, pay attention to the schedule that we've got, and if you want an opportunity to share a little bit with him and to hear more, we've made some opportunities for that to happen. Hallelujah. Will you stand with me for our benediction? And now may the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. In the name of God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.